Okay, we've still got people trickling in. I think we'll wait just another minute or two. Thanks everybody for joining. Okay, I think we should go ahead and get started. It's a couple minutes after 12. Chenyi, if you're ready, yeah. Okay, sounds good. Well then, it's my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Chenyi Wu from who comes to us from Taiwan. And I wanted to give you just a little bit of background. Chenyi did her bachelor's degrees, 2 bachelor's degrees, actually, one in hydraulic and ocean engineering, and the other in life sciences. And so when she approached me many years ago about the possibility of coming to Duke to do graduate work, it was really a great match for what I like to do in my lab, which is combined life sciences with engineering to explore solutions for a variety of problems. And I just wanted to go back to that email of November the 3rd, 2014. So all of you, my current students, maybe you can stay out of embarrassing photos, but you've all emailed me on your way into inquiring about grad school. So those things I have for better or for worse. But I wanted to just read quickly to give you an idea of where Chenyi was at that time and where she is now. She says, again, this is in 2014, I've read some papers in the past week. Many of Dr. Howell's research on flippers focused on flippers' efficiency in different species, i.e. different shapes. He measured the lift and drag caused by different angle of attack. So Dr. Howell's previous work were all experiment-based. However, in this research, the tubercles on humpback flippers, applications of bio-inspired technology, Dr. Howell mentioned the vortex along the flippers, both trailing vortex and tip vortex, but did not measure it. I think it was because he was concentrated on individual scale, but not the interaction between individuals. So I'm wondering about individual influence by the vortex caused by another. She also went on to discuss a variety of other similar projects on hydrodynamics of large whales. And as you can see from her opening slide, she certainly pursued that with abandon. So it's been a great pleasure to have her in the lab and pushing one side of the envelope within the lab. And I'm very grateful to Lawrence Howell as co-host and co-mentor and co-advisor for Chenyi, and then also her other committee members, Brian Mann, Julie Vanderhoop, and Frank Fish, who've all provided great input to her work. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Chenyi. And just so everybody knows, this is the public presentation will go on we'll wrap up by noon, and then we'll exit and go to the private defense, which will start soon thereafter. So I will gladly turn it over to Chenyi. Thanks for all your hard work and contributions to the lab. We're looking forward to hearing your work.
Thanks for the introduction. And so for those, it was my pleasure to be here and present my work in the past few years to all of you guys from a variety of backgrounds and with different knowledge. So today I'm going to present part of my dissertation on analyzing hydrodynamic properties of the non-affinity right whale with computer solutions. Before I get started, I would like to briefly touch on my motivation and why I came here to do this work with Doug and Lawrence. So as Doug mentioned earlier, I started my undergraduate degree as an engineering student. However, a few summers ago, I got a job as a naturalist on a whale watching boat, which I had to live on site and introduce all the history and marine biodiversity and also marine mammals to all the audience with different backgrounds. At the same time, I lived in a fishing port for a few summers, so that's when I got to know the fisheries in Taiwan, and some of you may heard about that. Taiwan is just like a fishing nation, and we have a lot of fishing vessels going on. So that unique experience prompted me to want to get into marine conservation. Especially, I would like to see if I can find a balance between fishery and also marine life. So I became a volunteer at one of the few marine mammal rescue center back at my college, and decided to do a second undergraduate degree in biology, where I apparently not good at that, experiments that I can broadcast to very easily. So as Doug mentioned, I reached out to him a couple of years ago, and now end up being here at Duke and conduct my research, which combine my engineering and biology background. So here's an overview of my dissertation. It comprised of 3 research chapters. All of them use numerical methods to trying to investigate the hydrodynamics of the non-affinity right whale. However, for the interest of time, today I'll spend most of my talk on the first 2 chapters. The introductory will allow you to get to know the importance of this work on the ecology of the right whales, as well as I'll give you a fundamental knowledge about the methods that I use and how I can apply such methods to the following chapters. So let's get started. When an object travels through fluids, resistance is created by physical forces such as lift, like point upwards of the object, as well as drag, which always against the movement of the object. The strength of drag is determined by the physical properties such as fluid densities, the shape of the object. Now you can see I have a flat plate, the cylinder, and the streamline object. So the strength of drag is determined by fluid density, the shape, and also how fast it moves. And the smooth outline of the streamline body shape allows a thin layer of fluid to attach to the surface. And within this layer, the flow remains laminar and incurs lower drag. This rule applies to living organisms as well, since they must overcome drag to move forward on the water. Therefore, under selective pressure, the ancestors of modern cetaceans developed streamline body shapes and transformed limbs to successfully return to aquatic environments. Their morphology delays separation of boundary layer and reduces drag while they swim. The total cost of transport is used to estimate the energetic expenditure of aquatic animals, which is the sum of metabolic costs, or say maintenance costs, and the rate of oxygen consumed by the animal as they just move or just respiration, and the locomotor cost, the energy cost for swimming. And I will come back to this just in a second. The focus of my dissertation is the North Atlantic right whale. The term right whale will be used in the rest of my talk. Right whale is one of the largest whale species. Most right whales are black with some white areas on the belly and chin. They have patches of rough skin on their head. We call it callosities. These patches, or say callosities, are distinctive between each individual of right whale. Therefore, this allows scientists to identify different whales throughout their lifespan. In summer, right whales gather in their feeding grounds and forage on copepods with their bathing plates, whereas in winter, pregnant females travel to calving grounds in coastal water of the southeastern United States and give birth and raise their calves. Right whales were nearly extinct due to commercial whaling. However, currently this population is still vulnerable to human activities such as fishery, shipping, and ocean noise, as well as climate change. Among this, entanglement in fishing gear is considered one of the major causes of unnatural mortality of the right whales, given the high mortality rates once the animal got caught in fishing gear, and compared to like shipwreck. Previous study found that over 85% of the population shows some evidence of encountering with fishing gear. Among those affected individuals, over half of them subject to repeatedly entanglement from twice to as high as 7 times. During entanglement events, so we have a right word here, this animal may end up having impaired physical functions such as reduced feeding capability if the fishing gear is wrapping around their mouth or say bailing plate, or injuries due to collisions with fishing gear. Some of those injuries could be lethal and result in mortality of those animals. Significantly higher stress hormone was found in entangled right whales by researchers at New England Aquarium. Lastly, carrying fishing gear may increase energy demands of those individuals. Okay, so now I want to talk about the energy budget of large whales. So as I mentioned earlier, daily energy budget of aquatic animals include the maintenance costs and the locomotor costs. But there are a few other types of energy costs associated with some critical life history events. For example, annual migration of some large whale species, as well as reproduction for females. And also, here I want to draw your attention to entanglement. So for an entangled right whale, say free swimming without any gear attachment, its body weight will be balanced by the buoyancy of the animal. As the propel itself, drag will appear, and therefore this animal must generate sufficient thrust to overcome drag. However, once it becomes entangled, attaching gear will also create buoyancy, weight, and drag, and inhibited the movement. Therefore, which means that the affected animal has to spend more energy, or say extra energy, to overcome these additional forces. So here's the roadmap showing how my research questions were developed. As shown in previous slides, entanglement caused a lot of problems to right whales. However, little is known about how the energy budget of these animals are impacted by such events, say entanglement. Therefore, with an engineering background, my dissertation aimed to understand the hydrodynamic performance of North Atlantic right whales from a physics standpoint. Knowing the energetic cost of right whales is of interest because once the animal cannot intake enough food, it may not only metabolize its storage fat, but lose its ability to accomplish tasks other than survival, reproduction, for example. And the birth interval for female right whale has been increased from 3 to 4 years per calf to over 10 years, and ultimately affects the population. Therefore, estimating drag on right whale is an essential approach to assess how energy demand has changed due to increased drag resulting from entanglement, but the baseline data for right whale does not exist. Several attempts have been made to estimate drag on aquatic animals, for example, conducting flow tank experiments on like some small species like fish, or recording kinematic data of animals with digital text and video recording, as well as numerical methods. With that in mind, this chapter was designed to investigate following questions. How do flow type and boundary layer thickness change along the right whale? And how do various hydrodynamic forces, here I examine shear stress, foam drag, and pressure force, disperse on the animal? Computational fluid dynamic analysis was performed over a morphologically accurate right whale model, which was built up with tiny cells, like virtual cells. And the right whale model was displayed at its gliding position. The blue arrow here indicates the flow direction. One advantage of using numerical method is that the morphometric parameters of the 3D model can be precisely measured by the software. And those measurements are essential while calculating hydrodynamic forces on the animal. Another advantage of using computer solutions for hydrodynamic analysis is that it allows us, or say me, to run parallel simulations under a controlled circumstance, such as modifying one variable at a time. So to estimate the baseline forces on the right whale model, speeds covering known right whale speed range was applied to the CFD model as the flow velocity, while the right whale model remains static in the fluid domain. The dimensionless speed is given by a Reynolds number, and drag coefficient was used for reporting dimensionless stress. By calculating those dimensionless parameters, I was able to compare between different simulations. This figure shows the drag and drag coefficient as a function of Reynolds number. It was found that hydrodynamic drag and Reynolds number fit to a second order polynomial model. While this is not surprising because drag increases with square velocity. On the other hand, drag coefficient decreased with increased velocity, and the minimal drag coefficient was found at the highest flow velocity tested in this work, which is 8 meters per second. Local flow velocity on the medial plane of the right whale are shown here. The boundary layer attaching to the animal can be distinguished from surroundings by the visualized flow velocity over the animal. Let's say here is a very thin layer of green color on the animal, and that suggests that the flow in those regions are slower and they're laminar. The thickest boundary layer was found at the lateral side of the peduncle, just after their body, whereas the boundary layer around the appendage, like flippers and flukes, were the thinnest. Flow was laminar from the rostrum, let's say the tip here, to approximately 60% of the animal length, and was fully turbulent from around 80% of the animal length to the fluke notch. As to know that laminar flow occurs at the surface of the fluke, just outside of the body wake region. These two figures show the distributions of shear drag and phone drag over the right wheel model in half domains. Most simulations were performed in half domains to save computational time. And I did compare the drag estimation between half and full domain and found that there just little differences were found. So only half domain simulation were shown here. The shear drag and phone drag on the animal was found higher in regions facing incoming floor and on the head of the animal and the leading edge of the appendage shown here. So the phone drag is actually the Z component or the normal component of shear drag. So the legend here, so the color is actually converted. With cooler color means lower shear drag, cooler color here actually means higher phone drag because it against the movement of the animal. The lower right figure presents the pressure gradient on the same individual, and the highest pressure occur at the tip of the rostrum and the leading edge of the appendage, here the flippers and the flukes. This finding follow the Bernoulli's principle, for example, at stagnation point, which is the physics term, or say it's the tip of the rostrum in this case. The flow velocity is 0 and the pressure is highest because the fluid is partially stopped by the object. To compare the result presented here with previous studies, I made it plot. This figure shows drag coefficient as a function of Reynolds number across multiple species. Green triangle here are the data of current work, while other labels and lines came from the literature. I know that this plot looks sophisticated, so the takeaway here is that under similar flow conditions, which are represented by Reynolds number, these animals are affected by drag at different levels. Potential reasons that making these diverse results are in twofold. First, these animals are in different sizes and shapes, and they all have different swimming capabilities. Some species can swim faster, some are good at maneuvering, or they're just slow swimmers. Secondly, pathology also play a role in the comparison. For example, while some small cetaceans were held in captive environments and recorded with camera, data of large whales normally were interpreted from digital text because they are huge and they live in remote areas. In addition, most drag data, or say drag estimation from the literature, were performed by active looking animals, like because they just like recording of this when they were swimming. Whereas the animal model presented here remains static in all tests. Therefore, it is important to bear in mind the simplified calculations undertook by both hydrodynamic and CFD models. For example, in the cases of estimating drag with hydrodynamic models that use data collected with video recordings or digital text, the outcome forces only comprise not only the small scale flow circulation on the animal, but also other factors such as waves if the animal is close to the surface. In addition, those physical factors in real world are ever changing, which implies that such drag estimations are correct, but only under certain conditions, not others. Lastly, interpretation of tech data may be performed differently between research groups. On the other hand, CFD models provide more accurate drag estimation because the morphometric parameters of the animal can be precisely measured by the software. However, this model assumes that the incoming flow is turbulent free, which apparently is not the case in nature, and that the animal is a rigid body without flexibility or maneuverability, and neglect the impact of traveling vortices induced by animal locomotion, which again is definitely not the case because they are animals and they do all kinds of different behavior in water. Lastly, differences between skin texture or say roughness of the 3D model and real tissue suggest bias to a calculation of friction force. To sum up, this is the first comprehensive study of drag and other hydrodynamic characteristics of right whale through a CFD approach. Force distribution generated by CFD simulations suggests that hydrodynamic forces on right whale vary with precision on its body due to the irregular outline of the animal. This finding prompts me to wonder how does body shape affect the hydrodynamic characteristics of right whale. So a follow-up study was undertaken to answer this question, which will be talked a little bit in next chapter. Secondly, it was found that drag on right whale is higher than previous estimation on this species and measurements of other large whales. Although a comparison between different models and some limitations were discussed in this chapter, my last part of the dissertation is trying to investigate how we can increase the accuracy of drag estimation while using numerical methods. For the interest of time, in the next 10 to 15 minutes or so, I will only be showing you the key findings of the rest of my work. So the third chapter of my dissertation investigated the impact of body deformation on the energy budget of right whale. Here, body deformation is defined as change in body shape of the animal, which was found there could be some variations at different levels throughout the animal body, showing up image, and also between animals in different demographic groups and life stages, such as they are juvenile or they are adult females, or whether they are doing like a pregnancy or not. I use images of an emaciated right whale to modify the original 3D model, thereby create a right whale model with imperfect body shape. Given the limited number of archived images demonstrating body shape of emaciated right whales, this emaciated model was not a replica of any specific animal, and it only exhibits the post-nuchal concavity highlighted in the red square, with additional circumferential losses of body fat, despite the photo that I got. Exact changes in the contour of the ventral side, as well as mid-body region and peduncle, were not the focus of this work. Likewise, a pregnant right whale model was built as described in the previous study done by a student in Nochak lab, and then normalized to the same size for comparison. Simulation results on all three models show that laminar flow shifted to fully turbulent flow after it passed the maximum body diameter of the animal. However, I noticed that there's a delay occurrence of turbulent flow on the pregnant right whale model, which could be due to they have enlarged girth because they are bearing some baby whales in their abdomen. Second, the boundary layer thickness and foam drag slightly increase within the post-nuchal concavity, which is circled here. By comparison, you can see the color is a little bit warmer, indicate the boundary layer thickness is a little bit large on emaciated animals. And also you can tell the differences on this figure showing the bone drag of the post-nuchal regions of the emaciated animal. Based on the simulation, drag generated by a gliding right whale is influenced by its body shape, but the changes are minor. I found that pregnant right whale experienced the lowest drag coefficient, which is possibly due to this individual was able to maintain a favorable pressure gradient and thereby delay flow separation and cause lower drag. Whereas the emaciated right whale encountered highest drag coefficient, possibly due to the concavity at its post-nuchal region, as shown in previous figure, with higher drag and higher boundary layer thickness, which increases the surface area that face incoming flow, therefore higher foam drag, and potentially disrupt the boundary layer on the animal. And what I was not showing here was the locomotive power comparison between free models and some measurements done by previous studies. So by comparing such a difference, let's say locomotive power required by right whale models, only little differences were found. And such differences were even smaller when comparing to the total energy expenditure of free swimming right whales calculated by previous studies with by considering like the energy consumption rate in their forage ground as well as their cruising speed. So I just put all the components together and found, okay, they're only like less than the percent change in the total energy consumption due to the shift from normal nourished right whale model to pregnant right whale model. So this finding suggests that deformed body shape may not serve as the primary concern of changing thrust power requirements when considering dynamic drag on a gliding right whale. Okay, so my last chapter is to trying to find the way to increase the accuracy of drag estimation while using numerical methods. So trying to find how we can just improve the measurements as we are just providing a baseline drag for this species. The animal encounter hydrodynamic forces and moments while they move on the water. So showing here in this diagram, moment is a measure of the tendency to rotate an object about a point or an axis because they are forced and they just cannot be balanced, so the object will tend to rotate. So showing here are pitching moment about the x-axis, rolling moment about the y-axis, and yawing moment about the z-axis. Aside from the success in morphological evolution, I talked in the introductory chapters, it has been well documented that animals developed a wide range of strategies to reduce energy expenditure in both terrestrial and aquatic environments. For example, formation flights in some bird species and fish schooling, although some like maybe bull riding of dolphins. And aquatic animals exhibit control surfaces such as fins and flukes for moving in fluid. However, these surfaces not only provide stability and maneuverability, but also additional drag. We call it parasitic loss. So this diagram shows the hydrodynamic forces on the flippers and flukes of the right whale and the moment arms associated with each force. All moments were calculated with respect to the center of the volume of the right whale model Because this model was assumed to have a homogeneous mass distribution, therefore the center of volume is approximately the center of mass, which we use to calculate the moment acting on the animal. I should mention that, in theory, drag will occur on the fluke as well. However, after the body pose of the right whale model was manipulated in this chapter, the fluke drag was approximately in line with the center of volume. So the moment arm was vanished and there's no moment resulting from fluke drag. A model is considered in its neutral trim pose only if the parasitic loads are minimized. Hence, the goal of this chapter is to find the neutral trim pose of the right whale model by adjusting its body pose. In order to execute different body poses, the mesh model was embedded with multiple bone segments, so its joint can be rotated in certain dimensions. Three scenarios, including one, first, adjust flip per pitch angle, and second, adjust the total spine pitch angle of the animal, and the last one, adjusted both flipper dihedral and pitch angles were tested. Note that in the second scenario, the flukes remain horizontal in this work. So at the end of each scenario, the optimal position of the body parts was applied to the subsequent simulation. By doing so, the effect of each variable can be diminished. However, due to computational complexity and the expense of each simulation, it was assumed that changes in one of the scenarios did not affect the other. In other words, we did not go back to check like the force distribution on the model after we complete the later simulation. After all three scenarios were tested, a CFD study was performed with the adjusted right whale model at 11 slow velocity, as I did in the second chapter. So based on the estimation from the free scenario, the flip per pitch and total spine pitch angles that provide minimal drag and pitching moment were adjusted on the original right whale model. And this plot shows the comparisons between original and adjusted model after body pose adjustment. Lift on the right whale model decreased by 50% to as high as 90% on the right whale model, whereas drag decreased by 10%, accrual speed tested, and pitching moment decreased by 61 to around 90% in either direction. Here, I only consider the tendency of rotation, so I use the absolute value of pitching moment to calculate the differences. So the simulation results suggest that cetaceans are able to balance pitching moment or other parasitic loss by adjusting their appendage accordingly. And the hydrodynamic drag was calculated approximately 10% lower than previous estimation provided in second chapter, where the flippers and spine of the model were positioned at an angle of 0 degree relative to the free string flow. However, trade-offs between trade-offs of minimizing drag appear as the angle of attack of the flipper was reduced, because we found a like dramatically decrease of lift production while we adjust the angles of the body parts. And this is especially important if someone wants to investigate hydrodynamic performance of some animals with negative buoyancy, for example, sharks. So on one hand, we would like to minimize the parasitic lock. However, while we're doing so, lift production will also be decreased, and thereby for those like sharks, they have negative buoyancy and they need to spend extra energy trying to keep them afloat. And lastly, because animals may balance parasitic loads by modifying their swimming behavior or body pose, for studies investigating the impact of digital text attached on the animal, it is necessary to identify the neutral trim pose to eliminate artificial perturbance, because without identifying neutral trim pose, and then we run the CFD simulation animal, we will actually get higher drag than what animal actually experience in water, because they will try to adjust their body parts and minimize such load. Okay, so for my dissertation, I examined the capability of computational fluid dynamic modeling for studying the hydrodynamic of characteristics of the North Atlantic right whale. And those results are presented here in this talk. And the major finding of my work includes first, CFD modeling is a practical approach to study hydrodynamic performance of cetaceans, especially if those animals are enormous, they're large, and they cannot be found in aquarium or ocean aquarium. And sometimes you can use digital text, but again, in this work, I try to use a different approach to study hydrodynamics of these animals. And I found that changing body fitness will slightly affect the cost of the locomotion of the right whale when comparing to some energy budget estimated in the field. And lastly, it is necessary to find the neutral trim pose of any given animal model before measuring the parasitic loss. For example, lift, drag, and pitching moments, as I discussed on the animal. Again, because since animals may adjust their body pose to eliminate those drags, then if we don't use the neutral trim pose to run the CFD simulations, then we may just overestimate the force on those animals. However, please keep in mind that data presented in current work should be considered as the baseline drag estimation, because the right whale models remain static during all tests. On top of that, the flow field in the computational domain is more stable than the dynamic ocean. Therefore, future numerical studies should address the kinematics of underwater movement, especially like actively swimming animal or as they maneuver in underwater like environment, while measuring the cost of locomotion. In addition, extra parasitic loss caused by attaching gear during entanglement, as well as possible injuries due to collisions in such encounters, should also be considered when evaluating the energy budget and population health of the North Atlantic right whales. Although some of these issues have been investigated with tech deployment or photogrammetry, other methods should also be tested and compared with existing measurements. With that, I like to thank my co-advisors, Doug and Lars, for picking me up and making me travel here all the way from like tropical small islands on the other side of the earth. And also thank my committee members, Frank, Brian, and Julie, who just always nice to me in the past few years, and some of us even meet like the annual at some conferences and talk about the work and how it can improve. Also discuss a lot of things with me. Also members of NORTREC Lab, especially my counterpart, Jillian, who joined the lab with me at the same time and supported me, because we are in the same stage. We did a prelim even on the same day. So we share a lot of pressure, anxiety, and happiness together. and also Dave, Anna, and Rose, who helped me a lot on like some tech data analysis, although I did not import such results in my dissertation. But without that, I won't be able to, get to know the mechanic of how we can use tech to understand the movement of the animal. And also Howard Lab alumni Greg, who also helped me a lot when I was first year at Duke and trying to get into like coding stuff and hydrodynamics. So along with people within SuperPod, Andy Ree, Joe, Vivian, Will, and Brad, who helped me doing my prelim because some of them have physics background. So with being in the environment with a lot of people just know biology, it's really helpful to have their input in my work. There's a field work. I was just being taken care by Zach and Heather at some point. So it's kind of weird to have meetings during the pandemic, but as you can see on screen, we did have a fun time with our lab. Like we have like a weekly topic for our meeting, like week or some Hawaiian style meeting, as well as some like fashion background with my like more like engineering style. And lastly, just want to shout out to Rachel, who helped us, like all the grad students, a lot here at the lab. Without her, I just can't imagine what it would look like as a graduate student being here. And also Rebecca not only helped with the administration, but also she was my landlord when I was still living at the coast. And also my housemates, Guillermo and Joanna. There's a lot of other MNC and Nicolas School cohorts. Like I did have a fun time being here. And also some of my lab mates in Taiwan, like Lua, Roger, who also just supported me, over the past few years because they have to get into marine mammal research in Taiwan, and we basically only have a cetacean research lab. And also my family who allow me to just do whatever I want, even, solely travel to another country for a couple of years. There are a lot more other people I want to thank, but for the interest of time, I will just stop here and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chenyi. Well done, very well done. Great, folks. I would like for Chenyi to see some faces and hear some voices. So instead of reciting questions in a chat, I'd be happy to have folks join in the audio and ask their questions of Chenyi if they'd like. So happy to take questions now. Anyone? No, the committee's going to get their chance at her in a few minutes here. So I see them piping up or coming on video. But anybody from the lab have a question? Nobody. You now know everything there is to know about right whale hydrodynamics. Oh, somebody's raised a hand. Sorry. Oh, there it is. Heather Foley. Heather, you're muted if you're trying to talk.
Sorry, I think I was trying to do a clap, not a raised hand. So, but I think someone else has a raised hand that I see. So you can move to that one.
EAD 40.
Hi, Chenyi. This is Liz. That great talk. I have a question for you. When you were looking at the the body dynamics and drag. For your emaciated animals, does it take into account the floppiness of the skin and the difference between the pregnant ones being kind of firm, or does the model just assume rigidity of the skin all around?
So the model is actually assume the animal is just rated homogeneously across the body, even though, as you just mentioned, there might be some lost body fat and the skin might be a little bit less on the animal, but I did not take it into account some low physiology or say histology components into the model.
Do you think it would affect when they get emaciated after being entangled? Do you think it would increase their drag coefficient?
Yes. So by comparing drag coefficient between, so the hydrodynamic drag measured on the pregnant animal was actually higher in their absolute value because pregnant animal has higher surface area, and that's a key component of drag. However, when we look at drag coefficients, which you just normalize the surface area of each animal, and I actually find a little bit higher drag on the emaciated one. And as I mentioned in my talk, I hypothesized that this was due to the increase or say imperfect, just like less streamlined body shape of those emaciated individuals. Did I answer your question?
You totally did. Great work.
Thanks, Liz. Anybody else? Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again, Chenyi, for that. It was a great précis of all you've done. There was certainly more there to go through, and I think it's a wonderful contribution to the field. So again, thanks to everybody for joining, for all of the support for Chenyi all along. Certainly great thanks to her, to the committee, and to the support staff in Beaufort as well, and also any of her friends and family who joined us from Taiwan in the middle of the night. So hopefully it was worth, I'm sure it was worth staying up for. So okay, committee, we'll see you in 10 minutes in the other room. And again, everyone, thanks very much for joining. Bye now.
Bye.